I went down there and felt that the computer club is information, is something you've learned, should be made available to the world. People can learn from what you and extend it and do other things. It's different than making products. So of course, I would pass out schematics to almost everyone in the computer club, schematics of the Apple I. The listings of the code that was in it, I would pass them out. They were given away freely to try to share, because it was a sharing environment. How many big companies like Apple ever started out by giving away their stuff for free? So it's kind of unusual. Nowadays, you go to a company, everything has to be secret, not talked about, not exposed, even if it doesn't matter if somebody knew what you were doing. So the Apple I, Steve Jobs, that was another one. He said, well, let's sell it. Let's sell a PC board. Make a PC board for 20 bucks, sell it for 40. We'll have to put a few $100 each in. I didn't think we'd get our money back. And he said, we'll have a company for once in our lives. It was almost like you're not doing it for seriousness. You can justify doing it just to say you're doing it. Just like a lot of the hacking pranks you do. It doesn't have to pay back with success and money and all that. So we'll make these PC boards, and I said, well, if I design it, I'm ethical. It belongs to Hewlett-Packard. So I went to Hewlett-Packard, and we had big meetings, and I tried to convince them I wanted Hewlett-Packard to do it. I loved that company. I was never going to leave that company in my life. And they turned me down, actually, believe it or not, 3 times. And so Steve and I started, and we built the Apple I, and we started getting a little bit of fame in this hobby computer world that was to come. Not exactly hacking stories, but we had this neat little fun device. And as I wrote the BASIC of my own, I mean, I just did everything myself, because whatever it took to get a complete computer finished, I had to do it. It didn't matter that I'd never read a book on it or taken a class on it. Had to do it.